Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget you can read my work on ESPN.com. In a minute, I'm going to get into more of my 5 things I think, and I'll be doing these throughout the summer. I don't know how many more, but certainly over the next several weeks. I will be doing 3 podcasts this week and then next week. And then after that, for a lot of July, it'll be 2 podcasts a week because, folks, there just isn't a lot going on. And there's only so much more we can say. I will be joined next Monday by former Redskin running back Clinton Portis. Had a really good conversation with him today, and that'll be out next Monday. And I'll be joined by Sam Fortier from the Washington Post on Thursday. So tune in for those episodes. And if you want to read my work on ESPN.com, I have a story up now about the run defense, why the Commanders feel pretty good about it. And as we get into the summer, I'm going to kind of break more about that down. Is this real, or is this a real optimism? I think they are optimistic, but should they be? Like, we can take a look at all of those factors and all the things going on because what else we have to talk about right now, right? And the run defense is pretty key. And one of my 5 things I am going to get into closing out on the fourth quarter. Shout out to Mike Stewart, Gold member, for just a little email exchange where he brought that up and I dug into the numbers, and it was pretty damning last year. So anyways, we'll get into that. That will be number 5. And before I get going, I know a lot of people are asking about Noah Brown. Do not have a really good update on him. I don't think we're going to get an update on him, probably, to be honest, until training camp. And just does he open up on the PUP list? What the deal is? I don't know the injury. I don't believe it's anything serious. Okay. That's one thing it does sound like. But what it is and the extent of it, I don't know. So, just know, like, the team's not going to be saying anything, and I don't think his side is going to be saying anything either. So understand that. So you're just going to have to wait, as we all are, for a few more weeks to find out the true, or what really is the issue for him, and just how long, whatever the issue is, right? And whatever timetable there is, whether it's short, whatever, I don't know. But again, I don't think it was anything serious. So anyway, let's get on to my 5 things I think. So I think number 1 is, and then because we just wrapped up the spring, I think we always have to be careful with the spring mirage, right? And you'll learn that over the years, like, things look good and sound good in May and June because everybody's in a good mood. These guys all come into camp and looking a certain way. And so what is it? What are some things that maybe, like, you don't want to get fooled by, or you have to be careful on? And the positions that are always tough to really, really gauge at this time of the year until they get pads on both lines, O-line, D-line, and then, to me, running backs, because you want to see how they move with contact, et cetera, and just how they react to that. And to be honest, we probably won't even see that until they get into the games, because they don't do the same kind of hitting. I do think with the O-line, D-line, you can start to get a good feel for them during practice, because there is a lot more collision inside than there is anything else. I mean, with running backs, they're going to pop and hold, keep them up. But with the line, they are going to go after them. They will have one-on-ones. They will be working in tandem together, et cetera. So that's where you really start to learn with that group. And so it's why, like, whatever you hear about, like, Daron Payne had a really good spring. And it wasn't really, when they talked about it, if you listen to him, it wasn't just about what he showed on the field. It was about everything else he showed. They felt like there was more leadership. They felt he was more outgoing. And so, like, those are the things you can latch onto, right? Javon Kinlaw, we don't know what he's going to look like in the games for them. What I do know is that they're optimistic that they're catching a guy on the rise versus somebody who's already has maxed out, right? So, but we don't know where he's going to go based on anything we saw this spring. It's impossible to know. I think it's easier to get a feel for running backs and corners because you see more one-on-one. The spring is a lot of 7-on. It's really like a glorified 7-on-7, and they do some 11-on-11, but this is really a glorified passingly, camp, because that's what you can really get a sense of, and you can work on the timing. What I like that I saw is, with the quarterbacks, basically usually getting the ball out in rhythm, or not holding on the ball too long, not having to look to run, as I've seen way too many quarterbacks here do in the past, in the spring in those 7-on-7 settings. You don't see that with these guys too often. Like you see it occasionally because it's going to happen, but not a ton, right? Not it's rare. So I think those are good things. The corners, I brought up Trey Amos. Like I thought, he's really good. I think Mikey Samuel had a really good spring. And so I think those are positive developments because of what they mean. Now, I want to see Amos work against a Terry McLaurin, for example, in camp. What does he do there? Because then you start to learn more about them. So, Debo Samuel, what did he show? Like, are you worried about? I know a lot of focus is on the way. I don't think that they're all that worried about it. Adam Peters knows this guy. What we've seen with Debo this spring is exactly what he dealt with in San Francisco with him. I think what he knows is he's a guy when you put the pads on and you put him in the game that he plays a certain way. And I think they're pretty comfortable with what they have there. So don't, it's funny because you don't freak out and you don't go crazy for anybody in the spring. That's just, I think it's a good rule of thumb because just because a guy makes a catch or has a good day, what does it mean? I think, like I said, with Amos, I think you can be very encouraged by what you saw, but it's one step. And like there's some other things, player absences, whoever's here. I think then it depends on the individual. Terry McLaurin, what kind of shape he's going to report in. He knows the offense. How he's going to play. Laramie Tunsil, he's done his thing. He's done his own thing a certain way for a number of years. He's a 5-time Pro Bowler. I think he's pretty good. Now, would there have been benefits for him to be here in the spring? Of course. But you can start to develop cohesion with the offensive line. Was it a huge, was it a vital thing? Not really, because he's done it, because he's had his success. I think what you're going to see with he and like the offensive line is the work that you put in the summertime, during training camp, when you're in the live pads, that's when you're going to really learn for him to learn a lot about Brandon Coleman and then to be able to help him and kind of start to mesh with those two, right? Because you're not really encountering, you're encountering some stuff and you can go over stuff through walkthroughs and all that. So there's a definite benefit. But, and as we've talked before, I don't know, like, it's just not something, his absence was not something that I was overly concerned with because he's done this and he's produced for the Texans. I don't think he's getting penalties because he missed OTA practices. And that's something I'll talk about later. I talked to Bobby Johnson about that, the line coach, when we had some sessions with the coaches, and I'll talk about that in a future podcast. Anyways, as far as Marshawn, the other thing is too is, and I remember talking to Logan Paulson at one point where, in the past was like when certain guys on here, it allows you to develop some of the younger guys and focus your time and energy on them, right? So the Brandon Colemans, the Josh Connolly's, like you can devote maybe a little bit more time to them. Is that good for the development? Sure. Now, it doesn't mean that you want all the veterans staying away, of course, but I think, my point is that I think you just have to take everything into a big picture perspective about what does anything mean in the spring. And with, by the time we get to the summer, to training camp, all this stuff is pretty much out the window. Listen, and one thing that as a parent and if you ever played even high school sports, your coaches would hound you to do certain things in the spring, especially in football, do it in the spring, show up to these summer workouts, do this, do that. And then they ultimately play the best guys. What you did in the summer, like they could dangle that carrot and say, blah, 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 you get the play time. It still came down to who plays the best. And so that's what always mattered. And it's even, clearly true at the NFL level. I think the coaches have a great more understanding. They don't sit there and tell guys, well, if you don't show up, you may not play. Like that's not how it works here. We all know that, and they know that. But I don't think, and the other thing is too with Zoom and all that, like, can you they have way greater ability to stay in touch with certain things that they may need to teach to the player or just let them know, whatever. So that helps. But again, you always want guys here. Marshawn Lattimore, would it have been good for him to be here? Sure. What you want to get some measuring sticks along the way with his recovery from the hamstring injury. Where is his game at? I think they got a chance to see that last week in the mini camp. But anyway, just wanted to go out there. So I do think like you have to be careful with those spring mirages. But there are some of the things that you do like from the spring that you want to see carried forward or that you think will carry forward is like stuff like Jaden Daniels' growth. Like you see there's still a little bit, I wouldn't say even say urgency. I think that's a wrong word, but I do think you see good pace of progression with his throws. That's a very good thing. And like I'd be curious to see how the offense develops with that, right? And where you put certain guys and how they're working certain guys. Like, can Tyler Owens cover in the slot as a, like how does that go, right? And so Will Harris against Zach Ertz, like those are things you can start to learn because like there's lessons to be learned when you watch those guys. Like I liked watching Will Harris in coverage. I thought he did a nice job. So I think that's a positive thing you can take from the spring. But there are other things you just have to wait and see until the pads go on and the games start to be played. Anyways, um, let's get to number two. And I know there's a lot of talk about, the DC Council again. I think the RFK Stadium bill eventually gets done and that the stadium eventually gets built at RFK. Now, the question has always been about the timing, and I've talked a little bit about this. I know I talked about it on I think on the members podcast at one point, just how like it may not that July 15th deadline. When you talk to the council members, like they always felt that that was an impossible ask for them, given when they got the mayor's budget. That goes back to like typically, and I've told you this before, like they typically would get the mayor's budget like in April, early April. Well, they didn't get it until like mid to late May this time, right? So there's a huge difference. That goes back to the congressional stuff, and this it took a long time for them to get things done, which then goes to the DC can't do their budget until then. So it wasn't like the mayor's office was sitting there holding it. It was they needed Congress to do its part, and then they could go from there. But the bottom line is it puts I talked to one council member, I think one of them even said it publicly, like they could always approve the budget, but not necessarily the RFK, like you can approve the money for it, but maybe not the terms of the deal. So that would be a separate thing with the council. And what they want the time to further analyze it. And like I know some of the stuff is already out, like they could have done that right away. And I definitely think some of them did because I talked to them before they even got the budget. Like they were aware of certain things in there that might be tripping points for them, but they wanted a chance to talk to more people. They wanted a chance to go over some of the details more. There was a request for proposals from other groups to see what else, to see could you do any, just to analyze the value of everything. And to do that, like it would take time to get someone in that role and then to analyze this deal, like it's just a whole thing. So like I still think it gets done. I understand the urgency from all sides. Like the commanders, like the term I heard was frustrated more than anything, right? With the pace of all that and with the fact that maybe it takes longer. Certainly the mayor's office wants to get this done. And because you don't want to open anything up for the commanders to maybe look again at Maryland or Virginia. I will say, like, this is where they want to be. Understand that. Like they've gotten this far. I don't think they're gonna turn their backs because the DC Council doesn't get this approved by July 15th. I don't think that at all. Um, if they really were that close to other places, I think you would have felt that before, right? So I think this will ultimately get done. I just think there's a pace that was going to be difficult given the timing of when they got the budget and from the mayor. But again, ultimately, even people who I think will vote no will say that it'll get. And Phil Mendelson, I believe, was on record as saying, I don't know if it was told the Washington Post or someone else, but on record saying he thinks it will get done, and he's probably going to be a no vote. And I've talked to others privately who would be no votes who say they think it will get done as well. So it's just when they've had other projects in the past, it does take a minute to get it to go over all the terms of the deal to approve that. But again, ultimately, I do believe it gets done. Number three, I think it was very important to bring back some of these key leaders this year, Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz, and bringing on board guys like Dietrich Wise, Jonathan Jones, but especially with guys like Wagner and Ertz because of the leadership skills they have. And where their games are at this year, I don't know. I know they both contributed greatly to winning last year, but their value in the locker room, on the field, the way they prepare, the way they conduct themselves is invaluable. And I think it's funny because when I was watching one of the practices last week, and you listen to Dan Quinn talking about the guys who've been in the program a year already, how they're helping the guys new to the program, how important that is. And then I'm watching guys like the way Zach Ertz prepares, the way Bobby Wagner prepares, the way he is with the other linebackers, just such a strong leader, the leadership, the leader that he is. Excuse me, I knew I'd get that out there eventually. but the leader he is, and just if you do it for just 1 year, I think it helps. You do it for two, and now I think you lay more of a legacy in this organization. Where and I have no clue if they'd be back for a third because it's way too early for that. But I do think being back another year gives a Jordan McGee another year. Like let's say he was only within 1 year. Like well, some of the lessons can stick, but if you're with them for 2 years, how much more do they stick, right? Like I think that can lay so much stronger of a foundation for each of their individual groups and the team that I think it was really, really important and vital that they brought them back just for that, not just for that reason, because they can both still play. And I think Zach Ertz, they were both very productive now. Are they, are Wagner and Ertz what they were in the past? Well, no. If they were, they would have gotten bigger deals. They would have, like they're not expected to be at the same level as the past. But can they have an impact? And of course, the answer is yes. And we saw it last year. Are there things that Bobby Wagner can't do? Sure. But if you do certain things around him, he can still be highly effective. And some of that is setting a stronger edge, right? For the defensive ends, and I think that can help him as well. So, but when you have him out there, there's still a lot of value to what Wagner offers. And the same thing for Ertz. He's not gonna, he's highly valuable in especially in certain situations. And I think those are key, but it's also the way they prepare. And if you can have Ben Sinnott in a room with Zach Ertz for 2 years as opposed to one, now you really get to see. Because what if Sinnott doesn't ascend this year the way that he hopes, or maybe the way they hope? Well, is there more that he can learn from Zach Ertz? Okay, maybe you thought there would be a natural progression. Maybe there isn't. What can you learn from Ertz to help you get there, right? What can Jordan McGee learn more from Bobby Wagner this year that can make him a better player, perhaps if he has to take over in 2026? Like, I think, I just think there's a lot of value in that. And I don't want to overstate it, but I do think it's key. And I think this group, the organization has done a really good job of bringing in certain types of guys. And I think that's why a Dietrich Wise offers a lot because he's that kind of a pro. He's not the same kind of guy as a Bobby Wagner, but he was a three-time captain in New England. And it's a lot of it's the way you prepare, it's the approach you take, it's the extra work you put in. If you heard my interview with Dietrich Wise, you'd understand that. And like just how he became a better defender up front. And like those are the lessons you can impart to a Johnny Newton or someone else, like or Javante Jean Baptiste, right? Guys like that, who may I think that all matters. Jonathan Jones can help a guy like Trey Amos. As Marshawn Lattimore, can he help him? Of course. But Jones, I think probably is because he was here, would have a could have a different relationship with him. And he's known for being that kind of guy in New England as well. So those all matter. But I think getting some of those key guys back, especially like Wagner and Jaden Daniels together, like that relationship and what that means in the locker room, I think is a big deal. But to see that another year in action, now you got to still go out and play, and you got to perform at a higher, at a certain level in order to justify all that. But I think they will, and that, like I said, I think it's a big time benefit to have those guys back for a second year. And it's funny because along those lines, like the impact that a Wagner can have on a Frankie Louvu. And I don't know what Louvu was necessarily like in Carolina. He clearly has worked a certain way because he's worked himself up from being, from where he was when he came out of college to where he is now, and just his ascent from in Carolina, his ascent, what he did last year, right? So and then you watch him like, and I talked about him and Kerrigan last one of the last episodes, and I know they feel like he's improved with his hands. The feeling is that he just has more awareness as a pass rusher. So how much of that obviously is him, but I also think he's a guy he wants to work. And I think what you talk to people there, like the humility he shows and the willingness to learn. Then you pair that with a guy like Bobby Wagner, and what more can he learn that can help his game being with him for a couple years? And again, you got to be able to play, but if you are, and you're that kind of leader, then it has a big impact. So I think that's to me a good thing. So, and it's funny because leadership can also be enhanced through experience. There's an assumption that everybody's a born leader, and the more you talk to people who are leadership experts, I don't believe that's the case. I think some people have intrinsic skills that make them strong leaders, right? But I think when you're in a certain situation, you also have to learn how do you lead in this particular situation. So if you're a Jordan McGee, like you could learn to lead at a college level, but how do you do that at an NFL level? What does leadership look like in the NFL? Then you combine that with maybe some inherent skills that you have, and that puts you at a different level of leadership, whether it's Jordan McGee or someone else. I mean, McGee has to be that kind of. I don't think he's be Bobby Wagner, but you have to be a strong leader if you want to take over in the middle for sure. Like the best middle linebackers that I've covered have been guys who are really good leaders as well. So, but the more you're around that, the more you see this is what it looks like, and this is what it looks like 1 year to the next. Because what if for this team you have all the success and certain guys had success, but then if you're watching how Bobby Wagner, you have all the success, then you watch Bobby Wagner or Zach Ertz and what they do before practice and during practice. I was like, well, if they're still doing that, then I've got to do that too, and that can only build on your success versus you don't see it enough. Then do you build on that success enough? So, anyways, anyway. Just want to bring that up because I think that's interesting. Number four. So one of the things I've learned too is that this group has similar qualities to last year's group. And I think last year at this time, I go back to the spring mirages. The one thing that wasn't a mirage is how tight this group was. Like those are some of the things you can see and feel during the spring. And you don't know how it manifests itself until you get into bad situations like a 3-game losing streak where you have a couple tough losses, or a couple really tough losses, right? And how do you respond to that? Well, then you go back to the spring and you look, this is when all that stuff was starting to build. And I know they felt like it built during the joint practices on the road. I know they felt like it built in Arizona. To me, the genesis of all that, it still goes back to the spring. And I think you see that here as well. And it's not just, some of it is Debo and Mikey Sanders still working together after practice. It's Louvu working with Kerrigan, all that stuff. You'd see some of that last year, but I do think some of that, you have maybe more guys who want to do that when you have this kind of situation because you don't want to let down the other guys in the locker room. But I do think you can, like that to me is one of the best things that I learned last year from this group. It wasn't about Jaden Daniels on the field. Like again, you see it. It was everything you heard about him. And like, that's why I think he's going to be really good. And then you'd hear about how tight this team is, not just hear it, but then you'd hear examples of it, like just how long people would stay here, how many more people would stay here after practice in the locker room because they just liked being around one another. That goes a long way. And how much value is on that? I've seen teams that had great chemistry that weren't that good. I do think you max out, but you still need the talent. You still need the quarterback. But when you have that, then you can really max out and maybe you can get to the NFC Championship game. So, it's little things. And I know others have talked about this. I talked about one time they have the basketball hoop in the practice, in the locker room, in the bubble facility, just playing with guys like that. Like I've always felt like there's value in that when they'd have the ping pong tables in the locker room. I always thought it was ridiculous how overblown some of that stuff was. Shout out Chris Russell, my guy. He knows I think that. But I do think like that stuff fosters competitiveness. Like this, Dan Quinn is, as you know, is huge, huge, huge on competition. And that's one of the things he'll talk like one of the reasons why he's excited to see where Luke McCaffrey goes is because of how he's competed throughout the spring. Like that's the number one thing you're going to look for because if you don't have that, are you going to improve? Because you really, as he said, you can have talent but not competitive. He doesn't want that. If you're competitive but you don't have as much talent, he'll take that because the competitive guy is going to improve more. And I think like I'll be curious to see what McCaffrey does because they talked about that and because like it'll be his third year at the position or this will be his fourth year at the position. But that I think all that stuff can help. But it is those games that they have, the games they play, the card games they play, like all that stuff helps because what it does is again you compete, you learn about guys when you compete, you have fun when you compete. But I also think there's a camaraderie that builds. Like you're playing the way they set up the locker room and different guys, it's not always by position group anymore. So you get to know other groups, but you're like, there are times where I remember talking to some of the players when they'd have the ping pong table, like they're playing guys from different positions that they never would have talked to probably in the past. So things like that all matter, but that's the stuff you start to see with this group for sure. And anyways, I think it increases the bonds that they have, and that's always a good thing. So number five, I think an area, and this shout out to Mike Stewart, again, gold member for pointing this out to me, or just bringing it up, raising the topic is I think they need to be a lot better in the fourth quarter on defense. And I'm going to go over the numbers and explain why. So be patient with me. I'm going to talk about the numbers. In the fourth quarter last year, the Commanders ranked 28th in yards allowed, 30th in points allowed per game. This is per game. 31st in third down percentage allowed, 32nd in red zone efficiency, 28th in rushing yards allowed, 29th in total quarterback rating, 29th in touchdowns allowed. Three teams in the fourth quarter had no interceptions. These guys were one of them. Tennessee and Jacksonville were the others. Finally, a couple more. So bear with me. It's a lot of numbers I'm throwing at you. In the fourth quarter, they had 5 fourth quarter sacks. They were 28th. I think it's 28th. I can't read my rating. 28th in pressure rate. So those numbers have to improve. Will they? Now, they talk a lot about situational football, winning time football. There's no more winning time football than in the fourth quarter. And if they can improve in some of those areas, well, now some of those close games that they won, maybe they're not as close anymore. Maybe like New Orleans should never have happened the way it did. There was a bad call at the end, but the comeback was ridiculous by the Saints. And the offense played a part in that. They blew a couple opportunities, but the defense let Spencer Rattler march him up and down the field. That was bad. Like you can't have that this year because if you do, like that 12-5 record changes if you continue this with some of the quarterbacks they're going to be facing this year. Can they be better in those areas? Well, I think the coverage stuff will be better. I think with Trey Amos, I think they just have more depth with at corner. Mikey Sarah's still back inside. He's looked good. Lattimore's got to be healthy, right? But if he's not, Jonathan Jones and Amos outside, could that be a good thing? Or however the combo is, but they have better cornerback depth. Like Benjamin St-Juste, he tried. I think he understood a lot of things, but man, in key spots, in those spots, he was not going to win. Period. He just wasn't going to win, and that was an issue for them. Well, he's not here anymore. Will Harris better in coverage, but some of this goes back to, and again, like the run defense. Can that be better? Like you're a bigger group now. Will that result in maybe you have more depth? Will that result in better fourth quarter success? That has to be the case. Like they did not have the kind of depth they have now this year. Will that result in better play in the fourth quarter, winning time moments? And it's funny because they spend a lot of time in situational football. And I think that's one reason why the offense was so good in these moments. But it still shows you have to have the talent also to go with that preparation. And I think once you do, you become better off. But they've switched. One of the things I give Joe Wick credit for is like he does not pay lip service to wanting to improve what he does or what they do. And he will look hard at himself as well as he will look at the players. I think Dan Quinn does this. Quinn encourages this. Like he'll always say, like they're going to talk to the players about, we want you to do this. This is how we want you to improve now. This is how I'm going to improve. Because they want the players to know I'm going to be working on stuff too. And for Witt, he would talk about like one of the reasons they had the front seven work more together was to be more on the same page, whether it's in the run defense, gap fits, or with pressure packages. So there's a way to improve these numbers, but these numbers have got to improve. And the sacks, and I'm going to hear all you people saying that's why they need a DN. For sure. They need that one guy who can get you that sack in the fourth quarter. I get that. I don't know that guy exists on the open market, but maybe you still go out and maybe Von Miller could be a situational guy for them to get that fourth quarter sack. Use him only as a situational rusher, right? So whether it's him or someone else of that mold, but that's what they don't have is that one guy. But can they put themselves in a better spot with maybe having 4 guys line up there who are capable of like 5 to 8 sack seasons that maybe apply more pressure in the fourth quarter because you have more depth there? I don't know. Like that's got to be the hope for them, but that's an area that has to improve, because if it doesn't, when you're facing better quarterbacks, if you're not better in those areas, and I do think they'll be better in coverage for sure. Like I really do believe that watching Amos, watching Samra still, Lattimore got to stay healthy. I'd like to say you saw, that he'll be in a much better spot, but we don't know about the durability. That's going to be the number one question for him. If he is, he feels a lot better, and that's got to help, right? So, but we don't know about the durability, which has been the issue the last 3 years. If he can stay healthy, that makes a big difference in this area as well. And can you get an Amos maybe to get a ball in the fourth quarter or two? Will Harris, can you force some things that maybe you didn't? Can Frankie Louvu be, as I was just telling you, like how they feel like his awareness, his hands are better? Can that result in maybe some more fourth quarter pressure sacks? But it's really hard, because for a guy like that, you're playing your butt off for 4 quarters. What do you have left in that time? That's when you need that one guy who can come through. And can you manufacture some things? Can you cover for a split second longer to allow some of this stuff to get home, right? So I think there's a lot of things that play into that. It's not as simple as saying, oh, if you go get this defensive end, all this is solved. That's not the case. There's a lot more that goes to it. But I do, I go back to this offseason, they fixed their offensive line. You had to do that. First and foremost, build a better line. You had to get some coverage help. They got that. Now the next step is next year, you've got to get some of the more, maybe another guy, not another guy, but a guy who can get you those double-digit sacks. Short of that, you better have depth and more, and maybe create more. And can you help with the coverage? I do think you can. Need to see it play out. But the fourth quarter, man, you heard those stats. They're not good. They got to be better. Contrast that with the offensive side of the ball. Offense in the fourth quarter, second in scoring, third in yards, seventh on third down, sixth in passing yards, fifth in QBR, and tied for first with 12 touchdowns. So they were highly productive on offense. And again, very good situationally. They spend the same amount of time going over the situations, but you have Jaden Daniels on one side, and you didn't have the Jaden Daniels equivalent on the other. Can you get, did they bolster enough to to improve those fourth quarter numbers? Because if you didn't, then it'd be another interesting season where they may have to have the ball last, go down and score again. But if you can improve those numbers, like we all talk about, like winning close games 2 years in a row, it's really hard to do that, right? The one-score games, ball can bounce a different way. Yes, that's why you don't want to put yourself in those spots all the time. So improve those numbers over here on defense. And on offense, you don't always, maybe you're taking a knee at the 30-yard line rather than trying to squeeze one in a 2-point conversion to try and win the game, right? Get one over the goal line to do that, right? So like that's the difference, right? If you can improve over here even a little bit, right, then I think you have a better chance for success in that way. Anyways, folks, that's it for me. I appreciate you tuning in. I will be back on Thursday with another episode with Sam Fortier from the Washington Post, and then on Monday with Clinton Portis. So I appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time.